Hello and welcome to the book thing. My name is Mark, and well, they said it couldn't be done. They said I couldn't read 12 whole books for my TBR for June, and okay, nobody said that. But if they had said that, they would have been right, because I didn't read 12 books. I read 9 books though, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. These are the 9 books that I read in June. So as you can see, I'm back outside. The weather's nowhere near as nice as it was. It seems we've come to the end of another Welsh summertime. It was quite a long one this year. We got nearly a whole week of nice weather. I was annoyed by all the wind noises last time I was doing this, so I got a fluffy thing for the microphone, so hopefully that's going to make things a little bit better. So the first book I read this month was White Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, and that is a prequel that was written to Jane Eyre, the classic novel by Charlotte Bronte. And this, again, spoilers for the really old classic novel Jane Eyre, but one of the main threads of that story is the fact that Rochester, who is going to marry Jane, transpires that his first wife is still alive and living up in the attic and is crazy. And that first wife is the focus for White Sargasso Sea. It's the story of Antoinette, who grows up in the Caribbean, the daughter of a plantation and slave owning family who, when the slaves are emancipated, the family is essentially rejected by everyone. They're rejected by the black community as former slave owners, and they're rejected by the white community as, well, quite frankly, poor now. So it's about the trauma that she has throughout the early part of her life, and how as a result becomes very, very emotionally fragile, and how the coldness and suspicion of Rochester eventually pushes her over the edge. So it's in the original book of Jane Eyre, it's seen that Rochester's first wife was mad to begin with, and there was nothing he could do, and he was duped in some way to marrying her. But actually what White Sargasso Sea puts forward is that this was someone who was emotionally fragile, and that actually Rochester's coldness and suspicion and his actions were the things that pushed her over the edge into madness. So it's sort of billed as a feminist retelling of the story of Jane Eyre, and I liked it a lot. It's not a particularly long book. It's good. I gave it a 3.5 stars. So if you're a fan of Jane Eyre, it's definitely worth a read. Seagulls are noisy buggers, aren't they? I don't know if you can hear this, but there's a seagull circling around making an absolute racket. So apologies for the seagull. Would you bugger off? Anyway, the next book I read was a book called Butter by Asaki Yuzaki. This is a translation of a Japanese novel, which I didn't really know anything about. I just picked it up in the bookshop and read the back cover, and it was described as about a reporter who goes to visit a serial killer in jail in order to try and get her story out of her. So to me it sounded like it had real Silence of the Lambs vibes to it, and massive fan of Silence of the Lambs, so that was and I'm a massive fan of Silence of the Lambs, so I'm really getting distracted by that stupid seagull. So anything that sounds like Silence of the Lambs, I was going to give it a go. And to a degree, it is a bit like Silence of the Lambs. It does have that trope of the clever serial killer type who is locked up and manipulating the person who comes to see them because of their charisma and their cleverness. And as well as that, there's the whole Hannibal Lecter-like fixation on food as part of the psyche of the killer as well. But that's kind of where the similarity ends. So it's the story of a reporter called Rika, who is going to see this convicted serial killer, Manako Kaji, who has met men on various different singles dating sites, and after spending short, torrid affairs with them, they ended up dead through various different causes, which have all been linked to something that she may or may not have perpetrated herself. She protests her innocence, but at the same time it's very clear that she is manipulative, and there is, whether she's an actual serial killer or not, there is a darkness to her, very much so. That's on the surface what the book is about, but actually what it ends up being about more than anything else is around the basically female place in society, in Japanese culture, and it touches on everyone from, you know, career women to mothers to daughters to J-pop stars. You know, it hits all of those different roles of women, and it looks on the expectations on them, on how to behave, and very much around what the body image expectations are on them as well. And what's really quite clever about the book is it doesn't feel like this is forced into the narrative in any way. It does actually feel like it's threaded through the story really quite cleverly. So I did enjoy it. The writing is really good, especially when it comes to descriptions of the types of food that's being produced in it. It does make you want to lick the page. It does have some flaws, and the main one being it doesn't really go anywhere. I felt like it was building towards a culmination, a climax to something that never really came. The story, for me, I felt it just kind of petered out. But it was good. I enjoyed it. Well worth a read. Again, it was another 3.5 star book from me. And yeah, that was quite a good one. So the next thing that I read in what was swiftly becoming Mark Reed's Feminist Literature Month was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which I'd never read before. Again, it was another quite a short book. It's a classic. I'm sure most people have heard of The Bell Jar, and Sylvia Plath herself, as a writer, I think she was mostly known for her poetry, and I think the only real novel that she published was The Bell Jar. But she was herself renowned to have struggled with mental ill health, and I think that the book is semi-autobiographical. So the story is about a young student called Esther, and it is split into 2 parts. The first part is centered around some time that she goes to spend in New York as part of, I think she's a winner of like an essay competition or something like that, but she gets the opportunity to go with a group of other young women to spend some time in New York and go to various different society functions and things like that. And then after that, when she returns home, you start to see a downward slump in her mental health, to the point where she ends up spending time in an institution. It's just a very frank look at depression and someone who struggles with mental health. It's not set up with any big antagonists like something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is, where it's her against the world, or her against the institution that's supporting her. It is just very much a frank telling about someone who is spending time recovering from the mental health difficulties that they've had. The first part of it in New York, I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to sound really stupid here when I say this, but it really reminded me of Catcher in the Rye and Holden Caulfield's time in New York. Esther is a much less irritating character than Holden Caulfield is. The reason I think that's going to make me sound stupid is because either that is the most well-known thing in the world, where everyone's like, duh, of course it's supposed to be like Catcher in the Rye, that's the point. Or it's going to be a question of, no, it's nothing like Catcher in the Rye, you don't know what you're talking about. Either way, I'm probably going to sound stupid by saying it, but there, it's out there. I liked it a lot. And if I am going to compare it to Catcher in the Rye, I liked it a lot more than Catcher in the Rye. I gave it 4 stars and it's definitely worth a read. So the next one I'm going to talk about is a collection of short stories by the science fiction writer Harlan Ellison, and it's called I Have No Mouth, But I Must Scream, which is a great title. Now the title story is basically about an AI that has taken over and destroyed pretty much all life on the planet, apart from 5 humans that it keeps alive specifically to torture because of its hatred and contempt for humanity. And it's from the perspective of one of those 5. And it's a very imaginative story, and certainly very ahead of its time when thinking about the whole murderous AI as a concept for a story. That being said, I don't think I've ever been more conflicted about a story, and I suspect the main reason I felt like that is because it was recommended to me by my 13-year-old daughter, and it made me question how dreadful a father I happen to be that that's what my daughter is reading. Look, I can't judge. I think I read The Exorcist when I was her age, and I'm fine. But the issue I had with this, and I did read the other stories in the collection as well and found the same thing, the level of misogyny on display in the stories is really, really bad. The female characters throughout this story in a special but are treated as very much sexual objects, very much in contempt, and have very little part to play in the story apart from either be the object of sexual desire or evil harpies who are causing tribulations to the male characters of the story, and sometimes both. And it was pretty much, it was a pretty uncomfortable read. I mean, it did give rise to me and my daughter being able to have some really good discussions about the portrayal of women in literature, and I'm not even going to blame it as being something of its time. It felt like just something of the author. I don't know if Harlan Ellison was a misogynist, but reading this collection of short stories, it would be an easy argument to make that he was. So while the stories were hugely imaginative, very well written and conceived, based on how badly some of the female characters were written and the thought behind that, I couldn't give this in good conscience anything more than 2 stars. So not a recommendation from me, I'm afraid. Welcome back to Feminist Literature with Mark. That's not actually going to be a channel that I do, because I think that would be the very definition of mansplaining. I think, though, after all of this, I am going to have to try and read something a bit manly, like Ernest Hemingway or Andy McNab. I'm not going to read Andy McNab. So, moving on from what was a disappointing piece of early to mid 20th century science fiction to a very, very good piece of early to mid century science fiction was the novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. Now, what I knew about this going into it was that this is the book that the original B-horror movie The Thing from Another World was based on, and then subsequently what the 1980s film The Thing by John Carpenter was based on. And I'm a massive fan of The Thing by John Carpenter. I think it's a phenomenal film. So the story, like the various different versions of The Thing, is about how a being from another world is dug up from the ice in an Antarctic research station, and It melts out of the ice, revives, and starts to wreak havoc on the base. I think what surprised me the most about this is I thought it was going to be much closer to the early B movie, but I was really surprised by how much that seagull is back again. I was surprised by how much of what was in the John Carpenter version of the thing was present in the original story. The creature was something that impersonated the people there right down to an almost cellular level, and it just created a sense of mistrust and paranoia among all of the men who were at the research station. This was a great read. For fans of classic science fiction, highly recommend it. It's Who Goes There, John W. Campbell, and I gave it 4.5 stars. So my next read was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, which is part of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere novels. And this is linked to the Cosmere by the fact that it is written from the perspective of Hoyd, who is, if you've read any of his other Cosmere books, you'll know that Hoyd is this world-hopping character who makes appearances in most of the stories. So the story is about Tress of the Emerald Sea, who grows up on this remote island, surrounded by a sea not of water but of these spores that, if they get even slightly wet, explode into these vines. So they to sail these seas is something that is considered extremely dangerous. And she lives on this remote island and falls in love with the son of the governor of the island. The governor ships his son off to be married, and he ends up getting kidnapped, and as a result, Tress decides that she is the one who has to go and save him, and goes off and, long story short, inadvertently becomes a pirate. So this is very much a riff on The Princess Bride. I mean, this is something that Brandon Sanderson has openly admitted. He wrote it for his wife to be a retelling in some way of The Princess Bride, and with this time where it's Tress who is taking up the role of Wesley, going out to sea and becoming the pirate. It's a lot of fun. I'd say that the tone of voice that Hoyd, the main character, has, it's quite a snarky, flippant tone of voice, which is fine, but it can be a bit grating at times. But that being said, the story is good enough to overcome that. And yeah, it's a good read. So if you are a fan of Sanderson stuff and the Cosmere, I would definitely recommend picking it up. The next one I read was Babel or Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is a sort of dark fantasy, is set in a alternate version of Oxford from the mid 19th century, in the height of the British Empire. And the main character is Robin, a boy who was born in Canton in China and was brought back by his mysterious benefactor to learn languages and then eventually go to study in Oxford in the linguistics department. And the reason linguistics is so important is because this version of the British Empire thrives because of a system of magic in place which is based around these silver bars. And the thought process is that there isn't a one-to-one correlation between words that are translated from one language to the other. It misses out some things in the origins of the word, it misses out some implications that are in the words as well. So if both of those words are inscribed on a silver bar, the bit that is lost in translation, that then becomes an effect that the silver bar gives off. And it's a really interesting idea for a magic system. So as Robin is at the university, he meets his cohort of other students who come from various other parts of the British Empire as well, and parts outside the British Empire too, and are brought in because of their knowledge of those local languages. Because all of the Western and classic languages have been explored, any new innovations that will come from this silver working is going to come from languages from much further afield. And as well as making these friends, he comes in contact with an organisation called Hermes, which is basically set up in opposition to this British imperialism. I quite enjoyed it. It has flaws. I think one of the flaws is pacing. It's quite a long book, and it seems to be quite large chunks of time when very little is happening at all, and then suddenly the whole plot happens almost in a matter of minutes. So the pacing is quite off, I found, with it. I think some of the characters aren't as well explored as they could be. I feel like, look, I'm Irish, so I'm hardwired to find any book that is critical of British imperialism. I'm automatically going to gravitate to that. I do feel like the message might have been hammered home a bit too much at the expense of the actual story. And I feel the magic system itself, while is a really intriguing idea, and there was some examples of it that were explained very, very well, it did feel like a bit of a, pardon the pun, a silver bullet, a bit of a get out of jail free card for, we had a silver bar. We're not going to tell you what the inscriptions was, but it did the thing that we needed the plot to do. So there was a bit of that. But, minor criticisms aside, it was a good book. I really enjoyed it. I'd give it a 4 stars. And it's worth a recommendation. Shock horror, I only managed to read one Discworld book this month. And that one was Men at Arms. Like with all the other Discworld books, I will do a video of it on its own. I am catching up with those slowly but surely. What I'm doing is I'm just filming 4 or 5 of these reviews at a time and then releasing them over time. So hopefully I should be caught up and starting to actually do the video reviews of the Discworld books I've just read, instead of going back and doing ones from a couple of months ago. So hopefully you should see a Men at Arms review up relatively soon. And the final book I read this month was a short science fiction novel, or novella really, because it's quite a short one, called This Is How You Lose the Time War by, I'm going to say this so wrong, Amal el-mohtar and Max Gladstone. And this is the story of these two beings who are on opposite sides of a conflict that is going down through history, where they are changing things and causing history to branch off into all of these diverging paths, in order that the cultures or regimes or whatever it is that they work for become the most dominant. The two agents are just known as Red and Blue, and they start to correspond with each other at different points in the war. It starts off with battlefield taunts of, haha, you were trying to do this, but I got here first. Over time, it develops into mutual respect, and then into just a straight love story. The story is very, very structured. Each chapter starts off with one of the agents in a particular moment in time throughout this conflict, and they then come across the correspondence that the other has left for them, usually in some form of imaginative way, like carved into the rings of a tree that they've seen felled, or in the chemistry of a bee sting that they receive. And from there we then read what the letter is, and this goes back and forth. and I kind of loved it. The writing is really, really lyrical and beautiful. The two characters, for something that has a canvas that is so broad and sweeping as to almost encompass all of time and space, it is a really, really intimate story of just these two characters. And I was totally invested in the pair of them. I was caught up in the emotion of all of the twists and turns as it came, and it was a genuinely beautiful read. Now, if you like your science fiction hard, where you can see the scientific principles that are being explained and explained well, this is probably not the book for you. If you like a sweeping epic that has a broad cast of characters, this is not the book for you. If you want intricately constructed world building where you understand the two sides to this conflict, understand where they've come from, what their goals are, this is also not for you. This is a really intimate story of these two characters and them finding love for each other, with everything else which is hugely imaginative but very, very implied at, so you only get a glimpse of what's going on. And if that appeals to you, then this is genuinely a beautiful and rewarding experience, and certainly was hands down my favourite book this month. So that was my wrap up of everything that I've read in June. If you've read any of these books and have thoughts on them, opinions that either agree with or disagree with mine, I'd love to hear about them. So please leave a comment down below. I'm going to be next doing my July TBR, which I've learned my lesson is going to be a lot less ambitious than my June one. If you'd like to see that or any of the Discworld videos that I'm doing, please consider hitting the subscribe button. But in the meantime, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. I hope you enjoyed it, and take care.